went zero to retired off of cash flowing real estate in about 2 years, self-made millionaire, all that stuff. Here to answer all of your biggest real estate investing questions. So as you're here, boom, let me bring this up. Awesome. Lisa, glad you're here. See other people joining on other platforms. Glad you guys are here. If you're actually in the call on Zoom, I will prioritize your messages. So as you have questions, go ahead and send them over in the chat and I'll get those answered before any other ones. I also have if you have questions, you're not able to join us now or in the future, you can go to blakeswanea.com/ask and submit your question there. And I'll put it in my list of questions to answer. That's blakeswanea.com/ask. Last name is Choisnet. So BLAKECHOISNET.com/ask. So if you got questions, go ahead and send them over in the comments and or in the chat, and I'll make sure to get those answered. Other than that, we will roll with the questions that we already have ahead of time. All right, great. So this is for the Rentals to Wealth community on school. It's a free community. The goal is really just to connect investors, help people make more progress to get their first or next cash flowing deal. That's what I focus on. Some people have normal hobbies. You know, they knit or they play basketball or they dance ballet or paint or whatever. I love real estate investing. I think it's the most fun game in the world, where you get to keep the money and you get to spend it. So that's the community for you if you want to join. Rentals2Wealth, the number 2, Rentals, the number 2 Wealth on school.com. You can see that also in the link and all in the other information. Background on me: I was a W-2 guy, started investing really just out of necessity. I wanted to settle down, start, live at a place, stop moving around as a bachelor at the time. So I bought a house hacked it and everything like that, and then started investing in cash flowing properties, retired in 2 years, so, multi-million-dollar portfolio in 18 months. And anybody can do it. Anybody can do it. I thought that wasn't the case, that it was reserved for other people, the Kardashians of the world, or people that would, the life or finance just kind of favored. And that's just not the case. You don't have to. So my goal is to get as many people there as possible, make millionaires. We've made a number of them already, and get people to their first, 5th, 10th, 25th, 100th door so that they can have the freedom that they want. In fact, I was just talking to a new client earlier today. He's got a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old, and all he wants to do is spend time with them. And I can identify with that. We got a 3-year-old and we got a 4-week-old as well. So we're still a little bit in the fog of war on the sleep front, but that's what I want to do. I want to buy my time back. And so I work with people like that. So, all right, let's get into questions. Again, as you've got questions, send them over. Send them over in the chat and we'll get you taken care of. Boom, check, make sure everybody's got what they need. Boom, awesome, cool. I got some messages here. Boom. Okay, cool, awesome. So we are good to go. Awesome. All right, well, let's start with our first question. And that first question is, how do I protect myself from shady contractors? This is a question not just for local investors, but also for remote investors. And I'll give you some pro tips. So how do I protect myself from shady contractors? I don't want to lose a bunch of money on somebody that I don't know whether they're doing the work that they say they are going to do. Okay, so I'll give you a pro tip. Pro tip is this: you want to lose 12 grand from a contractor just like I did. You want to know how not to lose 12 grand from a contractor just like I did. You got to do these 3 things to protect yourself. There are 3 things that you can do to protect yourself when working with a contractor that you don't know whether or not you can trust them. All right. There are a few things to do. First is use referrals. Referrals. What you do by using referrals is you let them do the hard work of finding somebody, and then you just piggyback off their success. So if you've got somebody in the market that's been investing for 15, 20 years, and they say, it took me 10 years to find the perfect contractor, great. You just skipped 10 years. You skipped ahead. The next question is, well, how do you find those people? Like, how do you find those referrals? Facebook groups is a great place. Real estate meetups are a great place. Any watering hole where they hang out, just go ask them, who do you use for your contractor? Go into those groups and say, hey, I'm a new investor in this market. Who do you guys use for your contractors? Other investors. You want to hear from other investors. You'll get one of a few responses. Either, hey, my guy's awesome, use this person. Or they're not going to respond because they don't care enough. Or they're going to say, don't use this person, he stole all my money and ran. Right? All of those are valuable responses. If you don't get any responses, go find the active investors in that market, in that community, and message them one-on-one. Ask, hey, I can tell that you're an active investor. I really admire what you're doing. Who do you use for a contractor? And get some quotes or get some referrals. Right. So that's the first thing, is referrals. The second thing is third-party accountability. You have to provide third-party accountability to your contractor. So number two is third-party accountability. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is, especially if you're investing remotely, which most people should be investing remotely, 90% of America lives in major metros. You shouldn't be investing there if you're investing for cash flow. You need to invest in cash flowing markets. So if you don't live in Birmingham or Dayton or Macon, Georgia, or Jackson, Mississippi, and markets like those, then you're kind of out of luck on cash flow. So you got to invest there remotely. So if you're investing remotely, you need third-party accountability. Once you find somebody that you're going to work with, a contractor, you got to have third-party accountability. You got to have a project manager that's going to check in. And project manager is really, they're just your boots on the ground. You got to have someone boots on the ground to be able to validate the work that your contractor is doing. So what do I mean by project manager? That's kind of a fancier term than it really is. It's just somebody that'll take pictures and videos of the property for you. And they do this once a week, maybe twice a week, depending on the pace that you're going, once or twice a week. They go to the property, they take pictures and a full video walkthrough, and they carry their phone and they talk the whole way. And they say, oh, I see this. And they just verbally process. They don't have to have real estate experience. They just got to have a phone and be able to be mobile enough to walk through everything. What this does is it gives you an accurate representation of the property instead of relying on pictures from your contractor, which it could be a train wreck back there, but if he's taking the picture this way, you don't know. You have zero idea what it looks like. So you need third-party accountability. And part of that process includes making sure that you're paying them in draws. That's another way to provide third-party accountability. So if it's a $20,000 rehab, you're paying them $5,000 at a time. You're not paying them all $20,000 up front. All right, so that's the third-party accountability. That's number two. And number three, this is the gold mine. This is the number one way for how to not lose money working with a contractor. Pay with a credit card. The first 2 or 3 deals that you do with a contractor, pay with a credit card. They're going to charge you, usually they'll charge you an extra 3% fee for processing. Consider that insurance. That 3% is just an insurance policy. Why? Because let's say you're working with a contractor and you pay him the first draw of $5,000, and he takes that money and he decides to go to Bali on a vacation with him and his wife, or him and his new girlfriend. Then you go to the bank. You don't have to go to the contractor and say, hey, give me my money back. And then you sue them and you got to go pursue litigation. And then you got the problem of actually collecting the money. Even if you win a judgment, then you got to go collect the money. You might never get that. Instead, you go to the bank. The bank is built out for this stuff. You go to your credit card and you dispute that charge. Usually it's within 90 or 180 days. You dispute that charge and you say, this is fraud. And they put the money back into your account that day. That person doesn't have that money anymore. And then they will go through, the other party will go through a dispute process trying to justify that it's real, but the dispute process favors the consumer 99.9% of the time. So those are the 3 ways that I would recommend for how to protect yourself from dealing with shady contractors. And what this represents is this is just a skill. It's just something to learn. It's not something that you could never do. You can never figure out. It's just another thing to learn. Just like riding a bike or learning how to cook a meal or learning how to do a push-up, any of that stuff, just a skill to learn. So that's what I'd say on the contractor side of things. You know, when you get down to the draws, that means you got to have a clear scope of work. You got to have a clear scope of work. The clear scope of work is important for you to understand what's actually being done and to understand what they think is actually being done to make sure you're both on the same page. So line item options, both with materials and with labor, separated out so you know exactly what it's costing for each one. Because really what this comes down to is the question of how can I trust a contractor that I've never met? How can I trust a property manager that I've never met? We're talking about the idea of trust. And trust has 2 components and only 2 components. Competence, number 1, and character, number 2. So, for example, if you're trying to figure out whether or not you trust somebody, you're evaluating their competence and their character. Competence meaning, what do they know? Do they know what I need them to know? And their character, are they going to try and screw me? All right, so an example is, my brother's my best friend. He's outside my wife. He's my best friend. I would give him my kids if I got hit by a bus. I would not, however, let him operate on my brain. I would never do that. He doesn't know anything about brain surgery. He's an idiot when it comes to brain surgery. But he's a really good father, and he's a really good man. So if I got hit by a bus, I'd give him my kids. I wouldn't let him operate on my brain. There are other people that are the opposite. They've got great competence, but they're terrible with character. They're horrible people. All right. There are certain doctors like that I wouldn't let operate on my brain because I don't trust their character, not their competence. All right. Those are the two things you're trying to evaluate. And when you're talking with a contractor, you need to evaluate both. The thing that new investors are most concerned about is the character component of operating with a contractor. And most people have a decent BS meter, but the way to validate that is one, referrals, and two, an insurance policy. And that insurance policy is paying with credit card because you just don't know. Evaluate their competence and their character. The competence side of things, you can take pictures, get pictures of their previous deals or the previous work that they've done, check out their social profiles, their website, all that stuff, Google reviews. Just know that whenever they send you referrals or connections to previous clients or pictures of previous work, they're not going to send you the bad stuff. They're only going to send you the good stuff. So it's never going to get better than that. That's the best that it's going to be. Just know that. So that's what I'd say on the contractor side of things. Long answer to a short question because it's an important question, and it's important to get a really clear answer on it. Awesome, cool. Well, we'll move on to next question. Bring that up. All right, how do I know if a deal is actually good or not? Whether or not I should buy a property? Okay, if you're scared to pull the trigger on your next rental, if you're scared to pull the trigger on your next rental because numbers confuse you, you've got to listen up. Listen to this. I'll demystify all of it for you. First, what you've got to do to be able to determine whether a deal is good or not is you have to define what good means ahead of time. So what is good? I talked to somebody recently and they said, well, I got this great property. It cash flows $200 a month. It's a great property. Well, is it a really good deal? Because if you put $100,000 into that of your own money, $200 a month is not great. But if you bird it and you didn't put any of your own money in, well, that's fine. That's great. And you got $60,000 of equity in it. Awesome. That's a good deal. So you've got to figure out and determine ahead of time what makes a good deal. What this does is it pulls the emotion out of it. Deal analysis is not an emotion thing. It's a science thing. It's a math thing. The numbers either say this is a good deal or it's not a good deal. So here's exactly how you tell if a property is a good deal. You use what's called cash on cash return. So you define criteria, cash on cash return, ahead of time, and then you run the numbers and you see, doesn't meet my criteria. Cash on cash return answers the question of the money I'm putting into this property, how much am I getting out in my first 12 months? So for example, let's say you put $10,000 into a property and you get $2,000 out in the first 12 months because it's cash flowing, say about 150 a month. That's a 20% cash on cash return because you get 20,000 or you get $2,000 out. That goes on top. On bottom goes what you invest in the property. All right? It's a form of ROI or return on investment. Cash on cash return on investment. 2,000 divided by 10,000 is 20%. All right, so you got a 20% cash on cash return. Then the question is, well, what's a good cash on cash return? This depends on your model. And usually, let's say you're doing either BRRRR or turnkey. If you're doing turnkey, a 10% cash on cash return is pretty good right now. It's fair. Because you're not, some people might say, oh, 10% sucks. That's not very good. I could get that with index funds. Well, yeah, you could get it with index funds if that was the only return profile. But real estate has multiple return profiles. With index funds, you're only going to have the capital gain or the growth of that index fund. If you're investing in dividend stocks, maybe you have two return profiles. You have the capital gain or the growth of that stock, and then you have the dividend once a quarter, usually. With real estate, you've got four return profiles. What are the four return profiles of real estate? Well, you got cash flow, number one, everybody's favorite, most sexy. Two, you have debt pay down, not very sexy. People really don't talk about it a ton, but somebody else is paying down your mortgage. Somebody else is paying down your debt on your property. That's pretty sexy if you ask me. The third is appreciation, which is what most people invest for and why most people think that they can't invest in real estate because they don't have a ton of money to invest in a property that only loses them money every single month. And the reality is if you invest in the right spot, you're fine. The right types of properties, you won't have to do that. But it's appreciation. The property value is up over time. And the fourth is my favorite. It's tax advantages. So those tax advantages are the IRS saying, hey, we want you to do this a certain way. We want you to do certain things with your time, like fix up the infrastructure of America. So we're going to reward the people that actually do that and maintain the infrastructure of America. So we're going to reward the people that do that. So those four return profiles, even though the cash on cash return is only 10%, on average, what I'm seeing on turnkey properties is 57% return in the first year. Now, not all of that is liquid. Only the cash is liquid and the tax advantages to a certain extent. But the other two return profiles are still very valid and real. 57%, compare that to your index fund. That's just not going to happen. All right. So that's why we evaluate cash on cash return. So is it a good number for turnkey? 10% makes a lot of sense. For BRRRRs, you want it to be above 60%, because if you're going to put in all the extra work, you need an extra reward. And if you're going to take on all the extra risk, you need an extra reward, because by putting rehab into any property, you're taking on inherent risk. And if you say, nah, it's not that risky. Well, some people might say, well, I'm all in $100,000 on this property. So, it's pretty predictable. Well, being all in on a property that you bought for $95,000 and you're only putting $5,000 of rehab in, yeah, $100,000 is a reasonable expectation for what you're going to be all in. But if you bought it for 10 and you put 90 into it, you're almost never going to come in under budget on rehab. You should buffer at least 10% of an overage for your actual rehab. So your all in is probably going to be closer to 110, unless you don't know what you're doing. It could be 150. So there's a very different risk profile based on how much rehab you're putting in, and you should expect a higher return on that. So 10% for turnkeys, 60% of cash on cash return for BRRRRs or above, with the ideal for a BRRRR is getting all your money back out, right? You're not in any money. So then as long as we have those numbers defined ahead of time, it's just a math thing. So then you go in and you look at what's the income on the property and what are my expenses on the property and how much am I cash flowing. That cash flow number yearly multiplied by 12 yearly is the top of your fraction, right? It's the numerator of your fraction. So that's $2,000 goes on top. On bottom is how much you invested to make that happen. All right. So if you put $20,000 down on a property for a turnkey, that's $100,000. That's $20,000 in the bottom. And if you're making, $4,000 in the first year, that would be $350 a month or so. That's a pretty decent deal. All right. You're going to make 20% cash on cash return. That's great. Anything above 10%, you're good to go. If it's below 10%, then you got to adjust the purchase price to make that 10% work. All right. So, and fair warning right now, people are really proud of what they're listing. There's a lot of inventory on the market right now, especially wholesalers. Wholesalers are very proud of what they're listing right now, unreasonably proud. You should not be listed. You should not be asking on almost any property that's out there. If it's been on the market more than a week, you should not be offering list price ever at all right now. So that's how you tell if the deal is good or not. Not every property is a deal. And that is exactly how to spot a really good deal, as opposed to a wolf in sheep's clothing. All right. Let me check for any other questions. All right. Lisa, if you got any questions, you go ahead and send them over in chat. Other platforms, if I want to check these other questions here. Boom. Boom. Sweet. Awesome. All right. Yeah, if you got questions, feel free to send them over. I'll get you taken care of. I appreciate everybody sending them over in the Ask Blake responses as well, or Ask Blake. If you got other questions that you want to send in, but you can't be on the call and you want to watch it later, send it over via blakeshwanay.com/ask. All right. Next question. I don't have any money saved. Can I still invest in real estate? Yes, you can. You don't need $50,000 in the bank to get your first rental. If you're broke, but you got some hustle, right? Then this is how people start without much money. That I started with less than 10 grand. I saved up $10,000 of what I called stupid money. And I worked my butt off to do that, to save up 10 grand, because for someone like me, I just didn't have much money. Left university with debt, and I was trying to pay off, and I was trying to save and be a good little boy, save up enough money. Once I saved that money, my first contractor walked off with 12 grand because I didn't do what I said earlier on how to manage contractors, because I didn't know how to do it. So if you don't have much money to start and you don't think you can do it, well, I'm a good example of somebody that did and does. So I'll tell you this. There are different models for investing in real estate. Your strategy has to be dictated by your goals, and then it's refined by your constraints. So think about it this way: if you've heard the analogy of if you're walking in the snow and you're trying to get to a certain post, you look out on to a fence post. Do you look at your feet or you look at the post? You always look at the post. You look at the goal, and that's how you get a straight line. If you're looking at your feet, you end up going in a curve. You go all awry. Right. Same thing with goals. You got to be looking at your goals in the distance. And then if you're looking through a window pane, you're looking through the window pane of your constraints. And those constraints are usually time and money. How much time do you have put into it? And how much money do you have to put into it? And that is what dictates your strategy. So if you've got a lot of time but no money, you should do one strategy, as opposed to a lot of money and no time. I talked to an attorney recently. He works 80 hours a week, and he's got a kid who has some really significant both mental and physiological medical needs. And so he just doesn't have much time. So he's got to invest a different way. So if you want an exhaustive list of that, go to the community, go to the Rentals2Wealth community, Rentals, the number 2 Wealth. I've got a training on this. It's in the 7-day fast start. I go through all of the different strategies that you can use, all the different criteria for evaluating which strategy is right for you. Is it wholesaling? Is it fix and flips? Is it short-term rentals, medium-term rentals, syndications, all of those things, so that you can evaluate what's the right strategy for me, because you have to figure out the right strategy first, and it's got to fit within your goals and your constraints. But yes, you can invest even if you don't have much money. So that would be one of your constraints. If you've got 3 to 6 hours a week, you can build a cash flowing rental portfolio. Those are the type of people I help get rentals within 90 days. The way that you can do that is use a model called the BRRRR model, and or other low or no money down models. There's a number of them, but the BRRRR model is the most scalable cash flowing model of anything in real estate. All right, it's not a perfect model. It's not the best for every single person, but it is right for somebody that wants wealth creation, cash flow, and scalability. So the way that this works is you buy a property that needs a little love. Think about it like a flip. Everybody's familiar with flips. They're familiar with Chip and Joe Gaines, Property Brothers, HGTV, all that stuff. The sweet spot of a flip is you buy something that needs a little bit of love. You put that love into it, and then you force the value north. So let's say you buy a property at 50, you put 20 into it, now it's worth 100. You own that $30,000. You made that money. It's your money. But you can't access that money the same way that you could with a checking account, right, or cash or anything like that. It's not liquid. So you've got 2 primary ways to be able to access that money. One, you could sell the property. That's a flip, right? You take that money, you pay taxes on it and some sales costs. You probably walk away with 20 grand, 18 to 20 grand, right? And you get to feed your family, anything to Disney World, whatever. But you give up the cash flow and the wealth creation. If you instead want the cash flow and wealth creation, you bring that property over to a mortgage provider. And they say, you know what? I can only give you 80% of the value of the home, because they don't actually care about 20% down. A mortgage lender does not care about 20% down. They could not care less about 20% down. They care about what comes out of their pocket. They care about 20%. They loan 20% loan to value. Some DSCR lenders will do 85% loan to value. Anywhere between 75 and 85 is very reasonable to expect from a DSCR lender, or heck, even a conventional lender. But they care about their loan to value. So they'll give you 80% of the purchase, or of the value of the home. That 80% of the value of the home is what dictates your new loan. But your value of the home is not 50, which you purchased it for. It's now 100. So 80% of that's 80 grand, but you only put 70 in. All right. Then you use that $80,000 to pay off the 70 in the refinance process. You have some extra money left over for origination fees, doc prep, loan, all of that stuff. And now you've got a property just like you put 20% down. No money came out of your pocket, because the first 50 plus 20 you borrowed from either a hard money lender or a private money lender, or a bank, or whatever. There's a bunch of money out there for those that's oriented towards specifically fix and flip types of endeavors. You borrow the money from them, and then you use the refinance process to pay that money back off. Now you've got a property just like you put 20% down. You didn't put any of your own money up, and you're making $200, $300, $400 a month of cash flow on that property, all while it appreciates. Somebody else pays down the debt, and you've got all these tax advantages that are allowing you to keep 20, 30, or 40% of your salary in your pocket for doing basically the exact same job. That's what the BRRRR model is. It's an acronym. It stands for buy, rehab, rent, refinance, and repeat. So a B and 4 R's. So for you to buy a property, you rehab it, you fix it up, you rent it out, then you go refinance your note, pay yourself back, or your investor back, and then you repeat this process. And the repeat part, some people think about this as like a cute little ancillary Yahoo, you did it. It's more important than that. It's a core function of this strategy in that when you repeat this process, when you go and refinance this note, you're going to pay off Jane Doe. Jane Doe has a 401k that's underperforming. She's been making 0.3% on it for X amount of years. She drives a 92 Corolla, and she's got $4.5 million to be able to put somewhere. And she's tired of it not making much money. All she wants to do is spoil her grandkids. So she loans you the $70,000 and you pay her back. And she just made 20% on her money for doing nothing. It is the easiest money you'll ever make, private money lending. So now she's thrilled. She can come back to you and say, hey, let's do this again, because I only make this money if you're using my money. And then she's going to tell her friend down at her mahjong tournament, wow, I'm making so much money over here with Joe Bob. And now you got more private money lending. All right. So a few things to note there. One is find private money lending. And two is if you're interested, if you've got 80 grand or more and you want to get involved in private money lending, I can get you connected. I've got a training. I'll teach you how to do this. There's no cost to you. I don't even charge people for this. I just teach them how to do it. And then I can connect you with my students to fund their deals so that you don't have to worry about, losing out or getting screwed. No private money lenders ever lost money on these deals. So if you're interested in that, go to BlakeChoisnet.com. You can look at invest with us, or go to BlakeChoisnet.com/PML, and I can get you connected. The other thing is you got to find private money. All right, you got to find money to actually be able to fund these deals. That's more of a science than it is an art. If you know how to communicate, you know how to find the right person and know how to communicate what you're actually offering to them. It's like handing them a cool glass of water in the desert. All right, and I've answered that. How do you raise private money previously on other Q&As. So if you're interested in that, go into the classroom of the school community and the Rentals2Wealth community, and you can watch some of that stuff. All right. Hopefully that helps on the can I invest in real estate even if I don't have any money? All right. Now, all right, next question. What if I make, okay, so what if, and I'll read the rest of the question, but anytime I see what if, I say one thing. That is a fear question. I'm scared of doing something. What if this thing? Well, anytime somebody's scared of doing something, they say, what if? The best way to right size that fear is to just answer the question. What if I make a mistake and lose everything? Well, that's an inflated assumption of what's actually going to happen. What if I make a mistake? All right, well, you got to figure out what mistake would you make and what's the magnitude of it. We'll talk about risk in just a second, but just know that anytime you ask what if, just answer your question. What if I make a mistake? What if I'm wrong? Okay, well, how wrong could I be? What's the worst case scenario? Okay, am I willing to make that decision for the potential upside? All right, so now the question, what if I make a mistake and I lose everything? If you are afraid of investing in real estate, I can give you a model, a mental model for evaluating whether or not something's a good decision. All right. And this is the 3-step process that I use to avoid losing money on deals. I'll give you the exact 3-step process that I use to avoid losing money on deals so that you don't make mistakes and you don't lose everything. Because what we're talking about here is risk. You're saying, what if risk? You've got to know what risk is and what it isn't. Everything in life has risks. Your W-2 right now has risks. Your consistent, reliable job has risks. There has never been a more volatile job market than today's right now. Loyalty in a job is zero. Pensions are gone, so there's no motivation for the company to keep you around. The older that you get, the more money they're paying, and they could say, well, we'll just lay this person off and hire 3 of them to be able to make up for them. There's zero stability. There's less stability in your job right now than you could possibly imagine in the history of the United States. So there's risk in everything. There's risk in getting married. There's risk in staying single. There's risk in having babies. There's risk in not having babies. So everything has risk. So you've got to figure out, what is the risk? Risk is a function of 2 things. And I'll give you my 3 steps here in just a minute. Risk is a function of 2 things. How bad does it hurt if it goes wrong? The pain. And how likely is that to happen? The probability. So pain and probability. The cost of it going wrong, and this could be an emotional cost, it could be a relational cost, it could be a financial cost. In real estate, it's a financial cost almost always. There's a little bit of ego in there too. It bruises your ego. You feel stupid, but that's usually not what people care about as much. There's the pain part and then the probability. So what's the likelihood that that's going to happen? What's the probability that that thing is going to happen? Those two things relate to the first two steps that I use in my process to make sure I don't lose money. I evaluate those two things. So first I say, well, what's the cost of something going wrong? All right. So I've got to figure out what the cost is. And then I've got to put a probability to it. So what I do is I say, all right, what's the thing that I'm wondering, what if this goes wrong? Name that thing. Now, what if it does go wrong? What's my worst case scenario? Put a number to it. Is it $10,000? Is it $50,000? And you might say, I don't know. Well, just make an estimate. If you're buying $100,000 property, the likelihood that your worst case scenario is losing $500,000 is basically zero. That's not going to happen. So if your rehab is a $10,000 job, your worst case scenario is probably a $10,000 rehab or $10,000 overage. Right? You say, well, what could go wrong? Oh, okay, well, maybe I have a foundation issue, or maybe I have a plumbing issue that I didn't know about. Maybe I have an electrical issue. They have a federal specific panel. I can't find any insurers, so now I gotta redo the entire electrical, and that's $5,500. All right, you got to figure out what's the thing that could go wrong, list it out, and put a number to it. So that's the first part. And to comment on that, once you start listing out the things that could go wrong, there are things that you can do to minimize the risk of that happening. You just do your due diligence. So you say, well, I'm concerned about a plumbing issue. I'm concerned about an electrical issue. Have an inspection on every property. Get an inspection on every property because that reduces the probability and the cost. But put a number to it. Then after you put a number to it, put a probability to it. How likely is this to happen? Is it very, very unlikely? Your goal is to do enough due diligence to where you make the probability lower. So if it's a 50-50 that you're going to pay $50,000 on something, you should probably do more due diligence to make it, a 1% chance or a 0.5% chance. And this is where people say, well, I don't have any experience. Experience is a good teacher. It helps you lower that probability. And the only way to get experience is to do the stuff. So when you start looking into a real estate deal and you're doing your due diligence, you're learning how to prevent future deals from having a high probability of failure while also reducing the probability of failure on this deal. So the first step, actually go put a number to the cost of the thing that could go wrong. Second is put a probability to it. And then finally, compare that likelihood to your best case scenario. So let's say your worst case scenario is you have to leave $10,000 in a deal that cash flows $50 a month. Not a great deal. That's your worst case scenario. But your best case scenario is you walk away at refinance with 25 grand in your pocket and a property that cash flows $220 a month. Are you willing? Then the question becomes the third step in this process is the question: are you willing to take are you willing to take the unlikely event that your worst case scenario happens in order for the unlikely event that your best case scenario happens? All right. Are you willing to trade those things? If you don't have $10,000 to leave in a deal, then the answer is no. But if your worst case scenario is leaving $3,000 in a deal that cash flows $200 a month, that's a pretty good worst case scenario as long as you got $5,000. You've got whatever you need to leave in the deal. If your best case scenario is attractive enough, awesome, great. That's the trade-off. That's all you have to, and you're doing this all day, every day, all the time. Going to work, there's a risk there. You could get hit, while you're driving. Driving is not a perfect thing. You could get in an accident. Someone runs into you and you break both your legs. There's risk there to going to work, to driving to work. But the likelihood of that happening is pretty low. This is why people fly on airplanes. What's the risk or what's the cost of an airplane going down when you fly on it? You die. That's the likelihood of you surviving is almost zero. But then why do people do it? All right. Like people do this all the time. Well, it's because the likelihood of that happening is 1 in 11 million. It's something like 500 times more dangerous to drive from a mortality standpoint. Right? That's all you're doing. And you're doing that subconsciously. You've got to teach yourself how to do that from a real estate investing standpoint. And that protects you from losing money. It protects you from throwing away money and losing money on a deal that you really shouldn't have invested in the first place. But that's the 3-step process. How much is it going to cost if it goes wrong? What's the probability of it going wrong? The likelihood of it going wrong? And then the last part is, am I willing to trade the worst case scenario for the potential of the best case scenario? All right. So that's what I'd say on that one. Hopefully that's helpful. on the making a mistake and quote unquote losing everything. And I would also say, we focus a lot on, what if I make a mistake and I lose everything? Or what if I make this mistake? What we don't do very often is the latter part of that third step, which is, what if it goes right? I think about this question all the time, because I'd ask this question with my wife before I married her. My wife was all in. We were probably dating 2 months, 3 months. And now I know she was all in. She was ready to get married around then. Or she was ready to at least commit to marriage at that point. And I was still trying to figure things out. I was like, what if it goes wrong? I have a high view and value for marriage, and I really esteem and value marriage and believe in it. But I don't want to just jump into this willy-nilly. And up until this point, my entire decision-making model is one of conditioning myself for courage, which is, if you're scared, just do it and figure it out later. Kind of like the high dive approach to decision-making. Just jump and then you can figure it out later. The challenge with that is it's not a good decision-making model for everything, right? It's a good decision-making model for small and medium things, but for large things like marriage, not a great idea, right? Because you can't undo it, right? You're committing to this person for the rest of their life. And so my wife and I took what we call the dark days. We had 4 days where we were kind of evaluating, where's this thing going to go? And I had a happy hour with one of my friends, Ben Pape. If you're watching this, Ben Pape, you changed my life. And Ben and I are good friends. We went to a happy hour, and I was kind of processing with him, like, how do I make this decision? What do I do? And he said, all right. He said, okay, well, tell me about it. He gave me some free counseling, friendship counseling. I said, well, what if this happens? And 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 I listed all of those things. And then he said, okay, put those over here. What else could go wrong? And after I exhausted all those things, I say, okay, they're over in a box over in the corner. What if it goes right? What would that be like? And in my head, a light went off. I said, it would be the best life I could possibly live. And I just started listing off like all of it, how awesome it would be. And, I just really hadn't even looked at that. I was so, crippled and overwhelmed by fear of things going wrong that I didn't even look at what could happen if it goes right. And on the other side of courage is the benefit of what goes right. And so I proposed to Brittany. We got married. We got married during COVID, so everything locked down. We planned 4 weddings in 5 months. We got married in our backyard. And it's been the best decision of my life. It has fundamentally changed my entire life. I've got, 2 baby boys. We've got 2 kids that went before us that we lost during pregnancy that we'll get to meet one day. And so our family has grown, and it's just created everything. But I would never have done that. I would never have done that if I only focused on fear. And so that was a great lesson that I learned from Ben. So anytime you ask the what if question, make sure you ask what if it goes right, not just what if insert something going wrong here, but also ask what if it goes right, both on the investing side of things and on the personal side of things. I think that's a really healthy way to condition yourself toward courage and toward building the life that you want. All right, next question. You talk a lot about finding a market that cash flows. I don't see any markets that cash flow. Do they exist? And if so, how do I find one? Okay, so here's the deal. Cash flow means freedom. Cash flow is the only way to freedom, but you have to buy in the right city. So if you buy in the wrong market, you will fail as a real estate investor. If you buy in the wrong market, you'll fail as a real estate investor. And I'll tell you how to find a cash flow market, but it might be the most critical component of your investing journey is picking the right market. Now, this is based on your strategy. So if your strategy is tax liens, or it's wholesaling, or it's vacant distressed land, or syndications, this is different. But your market should be in line with your strategy. If you're looking for cash flow, long-term wealth generation, cash flow, price of entry, all of those things, I mean, your market is the single most important thing. It's kind of like, if you can invest where you live, but 90% of America lives in large metros where the price and the rent do not make any sense. You could, buy a $500,000 house, rent it out for $2,300 a month. Other markets, you can find a $100,000 house to rent for $2,200 a month. How do I know? My market has them. They're all over the place. You have to find the right market. Market has to support your goals. I just mentioned my 3-year-old. We've got my 3-year-old boy, Brandon. He's growing out of all his clothes. He's growing like a weed. If my wife said, Blake, go find a new outfit for Brandon, and if I went to Home Depot because it's closer to where I live, would I come home with anything helpful? No, I'm screwed. There's no way I can come home with anything helpful from Home Depot for my kid to wear. I mean, yard gloves, a tarp, and some rope is my best situation. But if instead I went to Target or Walmart, I could be a completely ineffectual father and a terrible husband. I would come home with something helpful. So your intention does not matter. Your execution is what matters. Your intention does not matter. Your execution matters. So you have to pick a market that supports your goals. So let's say your goals are cash flow. In that case, you have to pick a market that's oriented toward cash flow. So how do I find them? I'll give you a few pro tips. Here are a few pro tips on how to find a cash flowing rental market. One, generally speaking, 95% of the time, these markets are going to be between 50,000 people and 250,000 people. So filter out all the markets that are outside those populations. Could you find one that's outside those populations? Maybe. But 95% of them are going to be between 50,000 people and 250,000 people. That's number one. Number two, another filtering mechanism. If the median home price of this property or of this market is above $200,000, throw it out. This comes from, I pulled hundreds of thousands of data points on markets. I think we have scienced the market evaluation process better than anybody else in the world. So if you do these two things, you'll save yourself a bunch of headache, right? That eliminates 80%, maybe 90% of crappy markets, and then you just have to evaluate the other ones. So that's step one is population between 50 and 250,000 people. Step two is median home price should be below $200,000. And you want to evaluate the market economics. Like you don't want, home prices that have been tanking and whatnot. You want a diversified economy and all that stuff. But the final way to check whether it's a good cash flowing market is the rent to price ratio of the market. So you have to calculate the rent to price ratio of the market. Now, what is rent to price ratio? Rent to price ratio is the 1% rule or the 2% rule. When you hear people say, oh, the 1% rule doesn't exist anymore, it does exist, just not in your market. And the 1% rule is the rent equaling 1% of the value of the home or the purchase price of the home. So a $100,000 home, a 1% rule would mean you got to rent that thing out for $1,000 a month. All right. Now, the reason why this is valuable, and it's an imperfect metric, but it's the best metric that we have for evaluating cash flow ability of a property or a market. The reason why it's so valuable is as home prices increase, rent does not increase linearly. Right. So a $500,000 home doesn't rent for $5,000 a month. Right. A $700,000 home doesn't rent for $7,000 a month. So you've got to figure out where should I really focus, and rent to price ratio is the way to do that. So on a market or on a property by property basis, this is easy to calculate. How much does a home cost? How much am I going to rent it out for? On a market basis, this is a little bit more tricky. So what I recommend doing is a few ways to calculate this. There's the top down method that I call it, is median home price and median three bed rent. So if you look this up for your market or the subject market that you're looking at, median 3-bed rent goes on top. Call that, let's call it $1,200. And then the median home price of the market, call it $100,000. That's a 1.2% rent to price ratio for the top down method. Now, the top down method just helps you filter out crummy markets. This number for the top down method needs to be above 0.8% for you to even consider doing any more work. So this is the third step, and this is the first step of the third step, basically. Find the top-down rent-to-price ratio. It's got to be above 0.8%. Otherwise, you're screwed. Then you want to actually look at real live data on the market. Go to Zillow, Realtor.com, Trulia, whatever your favorite syndicated tool is for finding properties that are on the market or that are recently sold, and go find properties and evaluate 30 of them. Look at 30 rental grade properties and calculate the rent to price ratio for each of those properties. Figure out what's it worth and what can it rent for. List all of those things out and then throw out the outliers. So ones that come in at 0.2 or ones that come in at 3.4, throw those out and then average the rest of them, or take the median of those values. That is what your rent to price ratio is for your market. And you want that number to be above 1.0. There are great markets out there with high rent to price ratios. I'm seeing great deals coming out of Akron, Ohio. This is gold right here. Akron, Ohio, Dayton, Ohio, Birmingham, Alabama, Macon, Georgia, It's Toledo, Ohio, Jackson, Mississippi. I mean, there are markets, Montgomery, Alabama. There are markets all over the place that have great cash flowing properties, and that cash flow. I mean, the market itself cash flows. And the reason this is so valuable is you could be an average to below average. You could be a novice investor, but because the market is conditioned the way that you are trying to move toward, you could stumble into good deals. As opposed to if you're focused on a market that is just not oriented toward cash flow, you could be the Einstein of investing, and you're just not going to come out with anything helpful. It's just not going to work. So that's how you find a market that actually cash flows. Great question. That is an exceptional question, because most people don't think of that. They just invest in their backyard or their own personal market, and that's for 90+% of America. That's a terrible idea because they live in a large metro. And then for the other 10 to 20% that don't live in large metros, I would say 10 to 15% of them don't live in cash flow markets. The economics don't make sense, or there's only 200 people that live in that market, so you wouldn't be able to have enough supply to actually get things rented out. All right, so you have to be able to find a market that serves your own goals. All right. All right. Next question. I work a full-time job. How could I possibly do this? You don't need 40 hours a week to become a real estate investor. If you've got 3 to 6 hours a week, you should be getting a deal every 90 days easy. That's what I work with people. I mean, if you carve out 30 minutes a day, that's 3 to 6 hours a week. It is very doable. Now, it's got to be one of your top priorities. I contend that everybody has 3 to 5 priorities, main priorities in their life. And this depends on your own capacity and your stage of life. So of those 3 priorities, maybe one is your career, one is your family. And if you got 6 kids, all under the age of 3, your capacity is going to look a little bit different than somebody who's, maybe 22, a bachelor, right? I got started whenever I was a bachelor, started dating Britt, and now we've got, 2 kids at home. One is a 4-week-old. So, our commitment and capacity looks a little bit different. So after those, you probably got 1 to 3 more, whether it's a, commitment to your church, or it's commitment to a hobby, or it's commitment to a certain skill, or it's commitment to learning a new skill like real estate. It needs to be one of those, because 3 to 6 hours a week is not nothing, but it's definitely not 40 hours a week. You can definitely do this in 3 to 6 hours a week. So the first thing I'd say is, how could I possibly do this? I work a full-time job. The first thing is, and I might be reading into your tone here, but it sounds like, how could I possibly do this? The first thing that I'll say there is, you've already convinced yourself that you can. Whether you believe that you can or you can't, you're right. If you believe that you can't, you're never going to do it. There's a really unique study called something on learned helplessness, where people are conditioned to believe that they're helpless. And the reality is they're not. But when you're conditioned to this way, it feels like you are, and it feels like there's nothing you can do to get out of your own way. But you have to condition yourself and fix that. If you want to go look up on YouTube, Learned Helplessness Experiment. It's an old, I think it's a video around 6.5 minutes long. It's an old grainy video of what looks like a high school classroom, and an older lady teaching them. It's a really fascinating study where they give half of the class one answer set or one question set, and the other half another question set. One half has very easy answers. The other has impossible answers. And during that experiment, they say, hey, raise your hand once you're done with number 1. And this side is all raising their hands. And a couple on this side are raising their hands here and there, just pretending. But their questions are impossible. And so then they talk about how after the first question, second question, their confidence decreases to the point where they say, I'm just going to give up. I know they're cruising, and it looks like this is fundamentally impossible. So what I would say is, if your thought is, well, how could I do this? Clearly you're wrong. Like, you don't know. I would say you got to fix your mind first. You got to fix your mindset and actually commit to this actually being a thing, because if nobody could do it, there's no way I could be able to do it. Right? I think I'm a good example. And I'm not saying this from a status of pride or anything like that. I'm saying it from a point of encouragement and support, is that if I can do this, you can definitely do it. If you've got a full-time job, I was a full-time job and a top performer, and I was still able to do this, and was still able to do this even after we got married. And then I was able to retire and basically focus on just this. So growing my portfolio and teaching other people how to do it. And so this system, the way that I built this system is built for people who have a job and a family. If you can carve out 3 to 6 hours a week, you're good to go. You just have to know exactly what you're doing. And so one of the challenges is you don't have anybody to guide you. And I'm not saying that even I have to be your coach or anything like that, but if you want to move quickly, you don't need to be reinventing the wheel, right? The YouTube is so valuable. Podcasts are valuable. This is part of the reason I do this free community is to just help people make progress. And one of the challenges is, as a new investor, you got to evaluate 20, 30 different strategies, learn them sufficiently so that you know their pros and their cons. And then you can say, all right, which one should I was just onboarding a new client earlier today. So part of the reason that I wanted to work with you is you'll tell me, taking my goals into consideration and my constraints, what's the best strategy for me and why? Give me all the information, and then I can say, yeah, we're good. I agree with that. Right. Or, no, actually, we want to tweak it here because I actually care about this over here as well. You got to figure out the right strategy for you, and it needs to fit within your goals. But the reality is you can do it. You absolutely can do it. And you don't need a million hours a week to be able to do it. But if you're going to learn all of these different strategies and then figure out how to do one, I mean, it's going to take you 3, 4, 5 years to get your first door. And even then, you're probably not going to get it. So you really need somebody to help you, somebody that knows what they're doing. And, if you're looking for a mentor or a coach or a guide or a sensei, whatever you want to call it, they need to have 3 things. One, they need to be able to, they need to know what you want to know. So they need to have done it, right? Not just say that they've done it or position that they've done it, right? Especially right now with how Instagram and TikTok and social media works. We have a lot of fake gurus, people that don't actually know what they're talking about, but are still coaching people to do it. For example, if I put out a program saying, hey, I'll teach you how to get a 6-pack in 6 months or less, no matter what, guaranteed, right? Your first question should be, Blake, you got a 6-pack? No, I don't. I don't have a 6-pack yet. But why would you listen to me if I don't have a 6-pack, right? If I haven't actually done it, right? And I guess there's a certain component to the fact that like coaching and the skill itself are different. But in order to coach and guide somebody, you need to have the skill and you need to be able to coach them. That's the second component. So they have to have the skill. If somebody doesn't have the skill, you don't need them teaching you because like 6-pack, I can tell you do crunches and eat leaves all the time, but I don't know the practical needs and requirements from a physical standpoint and a psychological standpoint to be able to make that happen. Like when I go to Thanksgiving and I see that, that stuffing and those the green bean casserole my mama makes, all the discipline goes out the window because I want some of that, right? That stuffing isn't exactly going to help with the 6-pack, right? So they got to know what you need to know or what you want to know. The second is they got to be able to communicate it. They got to be able to teach it. And then that's a distinct and discrete skill. So if you got 100 people that know this skill or that know how to invest in real estate or whatever skill it is, it could be fencing or bobsledding, I don't care, or whatever it is that you're trying to learn, maybe 5 of them, maybe 10 of them are going to be able to teach it and communicate it. So that's a discrete skill in itself. So that whittles it down from there. The third thing that you need out of somebody if you're going to have them coach you or walk you through learning any skill, is they need to be willing and able to give you their time. So, and this is general for real estate investing, this is the hardest one, because if you're really good at real estate investing and you've bought back your time and you're retired and whatnot, like you say, well, why would I teach somebody that I don't know? I barely know them. I'm going to give them a bunch of my time. And how much time can I reasonably give them? Once a week for an hour is probably the maximum you're going to get. And that's if they really like you. Once a month is probably more reasonable. And that's if they're going to commit any time to you. And the likelihood is that they just say, nah, it's not a priority for me. So on top of it, they've got to care about it enough to actually be able to help you. And so if you got somebody that in your life that will do that for you, if it's an uncle, if it's a friend, if it's your dog's playmate's friend that their owner, great, awesome. Hitch your wagon to their truck. And what I would tell them is, hey, will you teach me? I will work for you for free. I will work for you for free just to learn what you know. And if you want me to do deal analysis, great. If you want me to do offering, great. If you want me to do outbound, great. If you want me to do, door knocking, drive for dollars, great. I'll do whatever you want. I just want to learn what you have to offer. For people that don't have that person in their life, that's how I function. I walk them through everything. And I've worked with a lot of people who said, hey, will you teach me? Yeah, sure. And I show up to the coffee shop where we say that we're going to meet. And then they text me 5 minutes after when we're supposed to meet and say, oh, sorry, I can't make it. I've got this thing. Like so that's a reality of things. Like when you're looking at coaching people or you're going to give your time to somebody, you also have to have a certain threshold of how committed are they. And so that's the offering to work for free communicates, hey, I'm really committed on this front. So that's what I'd say on that front is if you're trying to figure out how to do it with and you've got a full-time job, one is very doable, but you need somebody to walk you through it. And so if you know somebody, heck, if you don't want to have like I don't have to be the right solution. I'm not the right fit for everybody. And so if you want somebody local, great, go to local RIA meetups, go to local real estate investing meetups. But for people who say, you know what, I want this specific skill, I want somebody to communicate it, and I don't have anybody like that in my life, that's how I function for them. If you're interested in learning more about that, you can go to our community or you can go to 90dayrentalroadmap.com/apply. That's 90rentalroadmap.com/apply. Or you can go hop in our free community, school.com/rentals2wealth. That's rentals, the number 2 wealth, and join that community. We got a bunch of trainings in there. We got a bunch of community of over 1,000 other investors. In fact, we're about to do a giveaway to those 1,000 to celebrate the 1,000th person. So if you want to get in there and get those giveaways, now's the time to do it. So awesome. Well, I'll check our chats. I think we're good on questions. We've got a few more questions. I'll have to do them next time. I might end up doing this more than just once a month. I'll keep you posted on that. But thank you to those that submitted their questions. And I hope that the answers were helpful. If you have questions between now and the next time we do this, send them over in the school community. That's school, SKOOL.com/rentals, the number 2 wealth, Rentals2Wealth/about, and you can join there and we'll get connected. You'll be able to message me. I can, DM with you. You can get connected with the rest of the community, go through all the training so that you know exactly what strategy to use and all that stuff. If you have questions about how I work with people, you can go to 90dayrentalroadmap.com/apply. Other than that, if you want to join next month's coaching call or Q&A like this, make sure to join the Rentals2Wealth community on school, and you'll be kept up to date on when that's going to be. It should be a month from now. It's usually Tuesdays, one of the first Tuesdays of the month, either the first or second Tuesday of the month. So hopefully this is helpful for you guys. Thank you for joining this week. For those of you that did, I look forward to talking to you again soon. We'll talk to you soon, and happy investing.